mulligans are an important part of every Magic format. And for most 60 card formats, you should learn how to mulligan for your specific deck. Same with competitive Commander. But for casual Commander, I feel like many players, especially newer players, struggle with mulligans and knowing what hands to keep. And I think for casual Commander, what hand to keep is a lot more universal than in a competitive format where you're fishing for specific answers for specific matchups. So I've made this guide to casual Commander mulligans to help you learn. But before I get into the guide, if you like videos like this, consider subscribing. Thanks. So what does a good hand look like? It can change from deck to deck, but generally it's 3-ish lands, 1 ramp spell, preferably 2 mana or less, and something to cast before or after your commander. Maybe a synergy piece or protection for your commander. And ideally, a card draw spell and a piece of removal. This is a pretty ideal hand. Although it is tempting to keep the Soul Ring +1 land hands, you really should mulligan those away to get something more well-rounded. You want your deck to consistently hit this ideal hand most games off of your first 2 mulligans. Remember, in Commander, your first mulligan is free, and going down to 6 isn't the end of the world if you got mana. And that's kind of all there is to it. You want to mulligan till you have a hand that looks something like this. But if that's all there is to it, then how do you get this consistently? To answer that, we need to go way back to before the game even starts. Deck building. This is going to affect your mulligans the most. The main thing you want is to make sure that you have enough lands. I will start almost every deck with 37 or 36 lands. This does include MDFC cards. Having enough lands is honestly half the battle. I've seen way too many casual decks with 25 or less lands. It's possible to make a deck like that work, but you need to be a pretty specific build. And with the power lands can provide these days, they can help fill the removal and card draw slots in your deck, but also function as lands, making it a lot easier to include 36, 37 lands, plus having more mana is almost always better than less. This is because you can usually at least cast your commander. If you don't have enough mana, then you can't even cast your commander and you're probably not doing anything. The next step is ramp. It's usually not enough to have 3 or 4 lands in your opening hand. You really want to hit 1 ramp spell early game when it's most important. I'll often use my free mulligan to fish for early game ramp. I usually run 8 to 10 ramp spells in a deck. 3 lands in a 2 mana rock is usually better than 4 lands, because most of the time you are more likely to draw 1 land in the next couple of turns because there's 30-ish in your deck than you are to draw 1 more ramp spell. But other than that, how can you go lower on lands or improve your mulligans? To smooth out your draws and make your opening hands more consistent, you're going to need some card draw. If you're in blue, you do have access to cantrips, which are great fluff that smooths out your draws. The only problem is cantrips kind of suck in most casual decks. I was going to make a whole video about cantrips, but kind of didn't have enough to say, so I'll just say it all here. Cantrips are really overplayed. Brainstorm is the 4th most popular blue card according to EDH Rec. Cantrips are honestly only good in decks that either want to cast many spells in one go, like a Storm or Spellslinger deck, or if you're a combo deck and you're just trying to dig for your combo. Otherwise, I think it's usually better to spend more mana to get real card advantage. This also goes for card neutral spells like Tormenting Voice, although not technically a cantrip. It's good if you need to fill up your graveyard and can help you smooth out a draw. But if you're not taking advantage of that discard, it's pretty mid. Instead of cantrips or other card neutral spells, you can run cards with cycling. Cards with cycling are great because they're modal. You can either draw a card or do whatever it does. The set of land cycling cards from Lord of the Rings have become staples in a lot of my decks. Early game, they search up for a land, and late game, they can be a card on board if you want. And they can grab dual lands or triomes, which is pretty sweet. The blue one is the best, but the others have merit as well. Honestly, with these, you could cut a land if you really wanted to. Only if you were running like 37-ish lands. Don't cut a land if you're playing 25. Also, cheap 2 or 3 mana draw spells like Night's Whisper or Quick Study can smooth out early game draws. Not all colors have access to card advantage at this low of mana cost. So for mono red, there are many impulse draw engines these days. I play basically all of them in my deck, and then with 37 lands and 8 to 10 ramp spells, I'll usually have 4 mana by turn 4, meaning I can get an extra card every turn, and at that point I usually have all the resources I need to have a good game. If you're mono white, there's not as many options available for card draw, so you're going to want to go with something more specific to your deck, or mulligan a little bit harder for the few card draw engines you do have. Now that your deck is fixed with 37 lands, 8 to 10 ramp spells, a few low mana value card draw spells or value engines, then I think you should find that between your first 2 mulligans, you should have a playable hand with 3-ish lands, a ramp spell, or at least 2 lands, a ramp spell, and some 2 or 3 mana card draw spell to help smooth it out even further. And if you're running about 10 pieces of removal, you'll also pretty consistently have about 1 in your first 2 hands. There are so many more things that could be said about mulligans in Commander. These are just the basics of deck building so that you'll have, on average, a good opening hand. But if you have any other tips or tricks, leave them in the comments below. Thank you so very much for watching. Subscribe for more.